Good evening. This is our special broadcast, this continuing 100-hour coverage here on CNN News 18, leading up to that moment when the Prana Pratishtha will happen. In less than 24 hours from now, the Ram Mandir will rise. It will rise after 500 years of waiting by Ram Bhakts across the country. It's been a fight. It's been a legal fight. There's been a violent chapter in it as well. But most importantly, there has been a morally persuasive argument that the most revered God in this country is being brought back to his rightful abode, his home, his birthplace. What does this moment mean for Bharat? Whether it is from a cultural point of view or a civilizational point of view, is this a moment of reawakening? And at the same time, how do we guard against this moment becoming one of majoritarianism, one where one point of view prevails over the other? Is this revival of culture a way of life which is thousands of years old? And mind you, it was bruised by invasions and conquests and colonialism. Does this moment offer an opportunity to try and write a new chapter and to try and also forgive and forget and perhaps once and for all bury the old chapters of the past? We'll get to all of that in just a moment with our special panel of guests. But I want to first go across to what it means to be in Ayodhya Nagari right now with just a few hours to go for the Prana Pratishtha.
गाए जिसके लिए मन में गंगा जिसके हाथ में है जीते भी मरते भी काम काज करते भी सुख में दुख में हर एक मुख में गर जाएगी ना जय श्री राम.
All right, full special panel joining us on this special edition of Brass Tacks. It's part of our continuing 100 hours non-stop coverage leading up to the Prana Pratishtha, which is going to be just past noon on Monday. On the broadcast tonight, Dr. David Frawley is an author and Vedacharya. Hindul Sen Gupta, historian and author. Suhag Shukla is the executive director with the Hindu American Foundation. Neena Rai, columnist and author of Amazing Ayodhya. Thank you very much for joining us on the panel tonight. Dr. Frawley, let me start with you first. This is a 500-year wait for Ram Bhakts, for Hindus across India and around the world. Capture for our viewers what this moment means. Yes, the wait through litigation, through violence, and like I said at the top, more than anything else, there was a moral persuasion which led us up to this moment. What does this Prana Pratishtha mean?
This Prana Pratishtha is not just about the Mandir itself. It is a Prana Pratishtha for Bharat itself. It is an awakening of its culture, its civilization, its tradition, its spirituality, its art. It is a vision of the future that the great civilizational power of Bharat can arise again, can take its place in the world, helping and guiding other countries, raising the people within its own country. And with this connection all the way back to the great rishis and sages and yogis, which are still traveling worldwide to share this message of Dharma, yoga, self-realization for all.
But when you say it's a moment of reawakening for Bharat itself, obviously India is a civilizational state, it's a 5,000-year-old culture. And yes, we can't deny that for over 1,000 years, first through the Sultanates and then through the Mughals and then finally through colonization, through the British, this culture was, I wouldn't say buried, but parts of it got ripped away, it got put under the surface, and India, that is Bharat, its history, its worldview, its culture, was being seen from somebody else's prism. Why do you say the Prana Pratishtha of Lord Ram, him coming back to his abode, his birthplace, is that moment which is a national reawakening of this culture, which, like I said, was distorted, was cut down, was reinterpreted, was viewed from somebody else's lens. Why do you believe this is a chance for that culture, that 5,000-year-old culture, to go back to what it always was and what it always has meant for the people of this land?
Well, first of all, it may have been suppressed at certain levels, but it was never lost.
Correct.
It always continued at various levels, Himalayas, ashrams, temples, and it started to be shared worldwide. You even had European scholars like Voltaire quoting Upanishads, or you had figures like Emerson and Thoreau in the United States. Vivekananda's spiritual awakening for Bharat started in 1893 and spread worldwide even before the independence of the country. And in every country of the world, I've traveled all over the world teaching Vedic knowledge, and there's no country where we cannot find a group of people, maybe not large, but still a significant majority, a significant minority, moving into yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, Buddhism. So it has remained alive. It has been preserved. Before the Mughals came, before the British came, the Marathas were the dominant power in India. The power of the Mughals had been broken. They were already rebuilding temples at that particular point. So that has been ongoing, and that continues to grow. But Ram is such an iconic figure. Ayodhya is the heart of India. Ramayana is the central work. And you have to understand Ram is a figure of the Hindus, the Buddhists, and the Jains, the solar dynasty, whether you have Ayutthaya in Thailand, you have Ramayana in Indonesia, you have Japanese version of Ramayana that has also come out. So it takes the ancient essence of the past and takes it to the future, because what Bharat offers the world is a science of consciousness that we don't find really so addressed elsewhere, and a way to be one with the entire universe, not just all humanity, all living beings, all existence, all time and space, one self and all being, Atma. This is what Upanishads, Gita teach. This is what Shri Ram manifests. Shri Ram is the avatar of the sun. He shines that divine light upon all.
Hindol Sen Gupta, if you were to draw a straight up comparison, the birthplace of Christ, Bethlehem, or the birthplace of Muhammad, Mecca, or the birthplace of Buddha, these were never contested in that sense, certainly not in the way that Ram's birthplace was contested. Like I said, there's been periods of litigation, there's been periods of violence, but all through this, there was a belief, an astha, a faith for a landmass of people, now 1 billion plus, who always believed that this is where Bhagwan Sri Ram was born. Irrespective of what the law said, irrespective of what the other side said, this was a matter of faith, this was a matter of belief. How would you explain that, if you were to make the straight up comparison, no one fought saying, Bethlehem is contested or Mecca is contested. But for Ayodhya, there was always this, but it's a disputed structure or it's a disputed history. How would you then explain that at a moment such as this, when, frankly, for me, I think it's the end of that dispute?
Very simple way to explain this, Zaka, and if one only has to look at the history of this movement to understand that history. Till well into independence, there was actually a consensus was building between the Hindus and the Muslims on the Ram temple. There was no dispute. If you look at colonial records, they always refer to the place as Ram Janmasthan or Janmasthan. There was no dispute about that. This dispute was manufactured. It was manufactured by a small clutch of hardline, quote-unquote, JNU tribe of historians well in the 60s and 70s. And it was a manufactured break of consensus. Otherwise, having looked at the historical record carefully, I have absolutely no doubt that the Hindus and the Muslims long ago after independence, would have come to some sort of mutually agreeable settlement. It became this vicious divide that was manufactured by this tribe of people. And we have people like Kiki Muhammad, great respect and reverence for being honest to their work and revealing the truth. You mentioned legal dispute. There is no legal dispute at all. The Supreme Court had spoken, and the records that KK Muhammad and others provided clearly showed that the masjid was built on top of the destruction of a Ram temple. Again, if you look at colonial records, this is not disputed. What used to be a land dispute was converted into this vicious communal thing by a small clutch of people. The historical record is absolutely clear on that. I actually disagree with people who say this is a Hindu-Muslim divide. It was not a Hindu-Muslim divide. In fact, the Hindus and the Muslims would have settled this matter amicably. First, the colonial administration stoked this battle so that it continued and became a vicious Hindu-Muslim divide. And then this hard left clutch of scholars continued to stoke it and convince the Muslim side that they must make it this communal issue and make this into this violent dispute. Actually left to the common people, common Hindus and Muslims and local people, they would have come to an agreement long ago. And on this panel, of course, David Frawley, who's seen the story for much longer than people like me, knows this, and many other people know this. So this dispute is a manufactured dispute, and I'm really glad it has come to an end. And it has come to an end, I repeat again, through the common wisdom of people like K.K. Muhammad, who were faithful to their real scholarly work rather than this manufactured vicious thing.
Nina Rai is also joining us. She's the author of Amazing Ayodhya. In Ayodhya, between the Hindus and the Muslims, there was always this belief that this is Ram Janmabhoomi, as Hindol Sen Gupta pointed out. Today, there's an air of festivity. It's like people are calling this a Rashtra Parv, a national festival. But speak to the viewers around the country and around the world as to why this could be a unifying moment, a struggle, like I said, a legal struggle, sometimes even a violent struggle, which has finally now been ended. Tomorrow, at the Prana Pratishtha, Bhagwan Shri Ram will rise in all his glory. It's a homecoming which Ram Bhakts have waited for 500 years. But at the same time, this could provide, and please explain to our viewers why and how this could provide an opportunity for a new beginning, to bury the old ghosts of the past, which, as Hindol said, the people never had those ghosts. Those ghosts were manufactured by politicians and historians and vested interests. But for the people who were the victims of this could be a new chapter to bury this contested, violent, litigious history of Ram Janmabhoomi.
Yes, in fact, you said the right thing. This temple, the ruins of this temple on which the masjid was constructed was called Masjid-e Janam Sthan. So all the Muslims and all the Hindus knew that this was the Janam Sthan, and Janam Sthan of whom? Obviously Bhagwan Ram. Let us also remember the people who fought for 500 years, whether legally, whether physically, or whether intellectually. These are people who never forgot and they never forgave. That is why we were able to sustain it for 500 years. Now, going further, this is a great opportunity. People are talking, there is no aggression. Well, why should there be aggression? There was a Diwali once when Ramji came back to Ayodhya. The whole of Ayodhya to celebrate it, lit diyas, they celebrated. It is the same thing. This is happening once again. I don't know how many years ago it was. Some say 25,000 years ago, some say 7,000 years ago, some say some lakh years ago. I do not know exactly when it was, but this is another Diwali that is coming, and this is a time we should rejoice. Why should there be aggression when we have got what we fought for? Whenever you get whatever you wish, whenever there is Iksha Purti, there is a calm rejoice, there is joy in the heart, and there is celebration. of course, going further, I also see that not only the kids on the streets are rejoicing, but I believe a descendant of Baba, His Highness Tussi, who wrote a letter saying that he apologizes for the actions of Baba. Now, this is when this shows that going further, both sides can coexist.
Okay.
Even the Christians, the Muslims, the Hindus, this is a uniting time, uniting event for everybody. And going further, when Ramji will come back to Ayodhya, economically as well, Lakshmi ji, if Vishnu is going to come back to Ayodhya, Lakshmi or Shri is also going to come to Ayodhya with him. And from there, we are also going to see prosperity. The prosperity has also started. Somebody was just talking about 3,000, kids are earning 3,000, even if you open a tea stall.
Correct.
This is the mass level prosperity that we are going to see. Going further, we are going to see enormous amounts of prosperity, enormous amounts of festivities, and this is a great time for us as a civilization, as a race, and as Hindus.
I do want to go across to Suhagesh Shukla. He's the executive director with the Hindu American Foundation. Obviously, for the Indian diaspora, whether it's the Indian American diaspora, the British Indian community, this is a huge moment, no doubt about it. But, Mr. Shukla, when you speak to your white friends or African American friends, how do you explain the significance of this moment to a rank foreigner, an outsider who's looking at this as a spectacle but can't understand what is the spiritual, what is the civilizational, what is the significance of this moment?
So I use the word restorative justice because that's what this really is, that a wrong was done 500 years ago, and it took that long for justice to prevail. And when justice prevails, good things come out of it. And I think that there's any country around the world has those examples. In the United States, the clearest example is what happened to the Native Americans. And we see how Americans at large are not just supporting Native Americans in their kind of battles with the federal government or with private companies to get access to their sacred homeland or their sacred sites or to stop oil drilling or whatever it might be. I think this pattern is actually universal. You can go to Australia and you'll see it there. You can go to parts of Africa, you see it there. So when you start from that place, I think it's been rather easy to explain this to the average American. When politics comes into the picture, that's, I think, when things get a little bit difficult because you get an erasure or a denial of actual history, regardless of what the testimonial, the archaeological, or the literary evidence says. You see people who should be kind of those torchbearers of honesty and truth so that the public can trust them, that they begin convoluting the issue and making the conversations that much more difficult.
Dr. Frawley, I think Suhag Shukla had a great point about if you look at conquests and colonization, whether it's in America, in Australia, the natives of the land, Native Americans, Aborigines in Australia, their culture, their rituals, their practices, their history has been sort of sidelined. Today, popular culture in America and Australia is what has been defined by the colonizer, whereas in Bharat, whereas in India, 300 years of colonization, and yet the spirit, the culture, the way of life of the vast majority of this land thrived and survived. And today, like I said, it's thriving. This is a moment of national reawakening. How and why did it survive? And how is the history here so different from what we've seen in the US or in parts of Europe or in Australia for that matter?
Well, for one thing, the Hindu population has been much larger. The traditions have been much more deep-seated, going back thousands of years. Even the ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Sumerians even traded with India. And India also had a certain support in Europe. For example, Columbus went to America looking for India. India was a wealthy country up to the time the British came and took the wealth of India. And its learning was well known. The Sanskrit and the meditation traditions were known at least by a few. They influenced Western philosophy throughout the centuries. So And then the traditions in India were able to sustain themselves. You had more temples. You had people who had the resources to rebuild. You had a very deep-seated culture in the family, in the community, in the village. And I have to say, the Hindus never stopped fighting. They never gave up to the colonial rulers. The British didn't defeat the Marathas, I think, until 1818 or 1820. And by 1857, it wasn't the revolt, it was a refusal to accept the foreign rule. Intellectually, the Indians also fought. You had Arya Samaj, you had Ramakrishna Vivekananda, you had the Swamis and the yogis. They didn't give up their identity. And even the great battle was educationally with the British, who tore down Indian education and replaced it with an anti-Indian education, an anglicized class. They've caused a lot of the trouble with the Ram Janmabhoomi because they identify more with the British and want to be in good with the foreign view. But India never gave up, and it's always produced great sages. And look at in the 20th century, how many great Indian gurus have traveled worldwide and shared the message of Vedas and even temples. Recently, the largest Hindu temple outside of India, except for Angkor Wat, has come up in New Jersey by BAP Swaminarayan. Next month, they're starting a massive temple in Dubai,
Correct.
and the people of Dubai are welcoming it because there's a much great openness to these things, and we must recognize that resilience and persistence and size and tradition that has preserved Bharat. Native Americans, smaller groups. Mexico was larger, but it was taken down. And we live by Native Americans. They still have a lot of encroaching into their land, taking over their traditions, trying to convert them, trying to take advantage of them. Battle's not over. But if India can do this, it is a good example to the rest of the world that we have to support the indigenous people. They are not just simply backward. They carry the earth wisdom, the ancient spiritual traditions of humanity. They show us how to honor the sacred in all of nature and all living beings. And that is a heritage we need today.
I do want to ask Hindol Sengupta, for the last 100 plus years, right, the things that Western culture has prioritized, whether it is materialism, you want to have a big house, a big car, capitalism, where does India's values and India's culture and the things that are important here, whether it is, you know, meditation and yoga and good health and Ayurveda, where do these figure in a world which is just, you know, it's a rat race? You're either, you know, trying to be the CEO of your company, or you're trying to be the president of your country, or you're starting wars. What's the value of these things? Are they just, you know, esoteric and they're great talking points, but nobody really follows them? Or do they have value in the world that we have created and in the things that we are asking people to crave for?
Fine example of what Indian values are, Zaka, is seen by the Supreme Court judgment that allowed for this temple to be built. I am sad to see that most people are not mentioning or forgetting to mention that while the Supreme Court judgment allowed this temple to be built in its rightful place, almost double the amount of land was provided in the same city, in the same region, not some distant region, but in the same region for an even bigger mosque to be built. And you must have seen, as many of us have, some initial plans of what that mosque will be. It will be a truly grand mosque. This is the spirit of coexistence that India always follows, and this is the spirit of pluralism and balance that India always follows, which vested interests in the West, and including vested interests in our country, perhaps don't want to mention, perhaps don't want to talk about. But what can one do about that? India has always been about balance. On one hand, our sages have shown us what to do with austerity and monastic vows. On the other hand, we have Lakshmi, who we worship as the goddess of wealth. This balance is a very critical idea of Indian civilization, and the Supreme Court judgment is one more demonstration, institutional demonstration of this balance. We are not a society that chases after extremes. Of course, our society has become deeply influenced by Western values and so on and so forth, and therefore there are all kinds of things. But if you look at the framework, if you look at the foundational principles, this balance is a very critical idea in India. And I think I want to underline this once again. The Supreme Court judgment that allowed for this great temple to be built provided at the same breath, in the same breath, even double of that land for the Muslims to build a mosque in the same broad region.
Yeah.
This is the coexistence. If we don't have interference from hard left and vested interests with their own sort of strange ideas of pseudo-secularism, this is the pluralism that is the lived experience of India and Indians, of Bharat and Bharatiyas.
Nina Rai, one fascinating point which one of the earlier guests had made, not on this show, in a previous show, was that the amount of money that's being collected to build a mosque, and Hindol is absolutely right, that mosque is also coming up even as we speak, and hopefully it will have just as majestic an opening as we are seeing today for the Prana Pratishtha. But 40% of the contributions to build that mosque have come from non-Muslims. And that, I think, is a beautiful illustration of what this country actually stands for. That it stands for Sarv Dharm Sambhav. But that same guest also made a valid point about how we should also guard against this moment. And this is a moment that is hugely significant. It's filled with huge amounts of emotion right across the country, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. But we also need to guard against this moment becoming some kind of a triumphalism, some kind of a, we are better than you kind of a moment. How does one do that, and how does one take the example of the ordinary people of Ayodhya to spread that spirit across the country?
I think that we are already doing that. We don't need any examples. We are already doing that. You don't see over the top sensationalization by the Hindus. You don't see all of that. There is no chest beating. There is no halla gulla, unnecessary halla gulla. What I actually see on the streets, I see small children with small flags of Jai Shri Ram, and they're so excited. They're so happy. Today when I was coming here to the venue, I noticed children with flags, people on the cycle. They don't have, they look to be from, the lowest echelon of the society, but they're so happy. They are excited. What you said, how do we present an example? We are already being that example, number one. Number two is that we can take a look at the life of Shri Ram and Devi Sita themselves. Once they vanquished Ravan, once they vanquished the clan of Rakshasas, in the sense, he got his victory, he got Sita back. Why did he fight Ravan? He fought Ravan to get Sita back. Once he got Sita back, there was nothing to do. He left that place, he took her home. There was no, he didn't say, not going to let Vibhishan be the king and I'm going to rule here. He said, no, this is yours. My Janmabhoomi is my Janani and she's the best. So I'm going to go back to Ayodhya. So this is something that we can learn from him. In fact, we embody and we are already walking in his steps. Another thing you said about the question you asked was about spirituality, about wealth. How do we see these things? Actually, spirituality, wealth and education, they go hand in hand. There are very, one of the most ancient sayings in Sanskrit, one of the most ancient teachings in Sanskrit, which we get from Hitopdesh. There's a very famous saying there. It says that you should do dharmic work, dharm ka karya, as if your shikha has been caught by none other than Yamraj. So you do it immediately, you must do it now. And you should do the work of earning wealth and education as if you're never going to grow old. You will never die. This should be applicable. This should be learned by all the Hindus. Many Hindus are already practicing it, and our civilization therefore goes hand in hand with both education, wealth as well as spirituality.
All right. So, Shukla, I want to come back to this civilizational moment, this cultural reawakening, which Dr. Frawley and Hindol were also talking about, that for 1,000 years, this culture has always been part of this land. It's always been in the hearts of the people, in their daily practices. But of course, there have been influences, there have been conquests, there's been colonization. And for 1,000 years, because of these different conquests, this culture had gone into a subliminal level. It was not the way India was viewed. For the longest time, even after independence, frankly, India was viewed as the land of cows and snake charmers and this exotic land somewhere there. But today, how is India mainstream and Indian culture and Indian values mainstream even in a Western worldview? Today, the West is talking about mental health. India has been talking about meditation for thousands of years, right? How has it become mainstream and not something, this faraway exotic thing that you look at and you're mesmerized by, but not necessarily something that you want to adopt?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I joke here, but there's probably as many yoga studios in the West as there are Starbucks. So we know that there's a thirst for something more. Capitalism has, of course, benefited a number of societies and the world. However, it has its limitations. And I think that, especially in the West, we're beginning to realize that there are those limitations. We're seeing record numbers of mental health issues, violence, social or politicization, and big divides just on ideological bases where common people can't talk to each other. And they're realizing that there's something more than just chasing materiality. And that's where I think that Hindu Dharma and India provide such a transformative path forwards. We in India also have to follow that path. Our tradition has always said that, yes, artha and kama are important, but dharma has to be at the foundation and moksha has to be our ultimate goal. So if we just learn our tradition, and so many people have been carrying it forth. When I'm in India currently and talking to just average people who are struggling sometimes to just make ends meet, they have this message just in their hearts and coursing through their blood, so that they are working hard, they're doing what's right, they're serving their families, they're trying to give their children a better future, but they're not losing sight of ethics, they're not losing sight of an ultimate goal. They remain amongst the most devout, and that's where I see inspiration. And I think that the West has a lot to learn from India, and I think that it has been doing that and will continue to do so.
I'll give Dr. Frawley and Hindol the final word as we come to the concluding part of this discussion. Dr. Frawley, there was, it depends on which way you see this, about Ayodhya pehle and then Kashi or Mathura baki hai. Now, one way of looking at it would be the biggest gods in this country and their abodes, their birthplaces should belong to the Hindus. It should not be a matter of dispute. That's one way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is that this is now, you're digging up old grievances, you're trying to right historical injustices. How does the example of Ram and what we have seen in Ayodhya, this long battle, and finally, as Hindol said, the Supreme Court judgment paved the way for this, Prana Pratishtha. What example does that offer for other places which are holiest of holy for the Hindu faithful in this country, whether it's Mathura or Kashi?
Well, in the case of Mathura and Kashi, there is much less dispute about them having their Hindu origins. The destruction by Aurangzeb was well known and documented and given out. So there's no dispute there. There was a dispute about Ayodhya because of the age, but these were done in the 17th century and where it was historically noted, and Hindus were already rebuilding these. So I think it means that these sites should also go back to their rightful owners. And there's adequate history, there's adequate legal basis for that. Now, however, I do want to make a comment about the Supreme Court and what goes on in India. Hindus are still second-class citizens in India in terms of their religion. The money from Hindu temples is expropriated by state governments throughout the country and used for whatever purposes they like, including governments like the Communist in Kerala or the DMK in Tamil Nadu, which are anti-Hindu. DMK was trying to build a big shopping mall by the Tiruvannamalai temple with temple money and resources. So Hindus have not been given their rights over their temples and their lands, and a lot of their lands have also been taken. And Krishna Janmabhoomi is very well documented on all levels. And even with the mosque in Kashi, you can see the walls of the temple on the side of the mosque. Anyway, Ahilya Bai Holkar was in the process of restoring these sites when the British came. They stopped a lot of this restoration of sites. And this is not to blame all Muslims either. Muslims have many different groups. This was a lot of the more aggressive leaders. A mosque was put on top of Ram Janmabhoomi in what was already a temple town at the highest position as a political statement of domination, not as a statement of religious devotion. They could have found any number of open sites where that could have easily been done. So there is still much work to do. Okay. And it means honoring these sacred places of everyone, but many Hindu sites have not been honored, and the world, it's part of their heritage, and this is Buddhist shrines, also Nalanda, so many things. So,
all right. Hindul Sengupta, the final word with you. Again, you talked about balance in one of your previous answers. You have, on the one hand, the Places of Worship Act, which was passed by Parliament at the time, in 1992, after the events of December 6th, perhaps with a view that, let's not open a Pandora's box. But at the same time, you cannot negate the history of Kashi and Mathura and how there are legal battles now in those places as well. How does the example of Ayodhya, the Supreme Court verdict, which has paved the way for this, how does it now hold an example for how other places of dispute can be resolved peacefully? As one of my previous guests was saying, there is so much emotion in the country today, but the most prevailing emotion is that of peace. And I think that's a great way of encapsulating it. But if you could just walk us through what the path forward is for whether it is Mathura or Kashi or any other place.
In any modern nation state, the path towards solving or resolving such disputes has to be an institutional framework. By an institutional framework, of course, I refer to the legal framework. Any challenge to status quo must be legal. Any resolution, therefore, also should be institutional and legal.
What a nice way to conclude this discussion. Thank you very much, Hindul Sengupta, Dr. Frawley, Suhak Shukla, and of course, Neena Rai for joining us.
Hey,